Hey everybody, I am here to talk about Flexbox and CSS grids, even though I barely understand either. I put together this little demo based out of some conversations today about how do we handle responsive design on a sort of component level when we don't have container queries. And the cool thing is that Flexbox and CSS grids does give us a lot of power that we can pull off some of these cool tricks without actually needing to use media queries. So in this quick little demo, I've got some HTML, I've got some CSS, no JavaScript, no media queries, and I have this page. And on this page, I've got a bunch of boxes. And when I resize the browser down, some things happen. So in this case, you'll notice that things started wrapping onto multiple lines, but also the design of the boxes changed. So the width of the container actually got wide enough that it made sense to put the image to the left and the text to the right, sort of our classic media object. And then as we continue to resize down, well, you know what? The boxes are now too small, so maybe we'll put the image on top and the text on the bottom. We'll continue to size down, and you'll notice now there wasn't enough for the items to go side by side, so they're now fully stacked, but of course we have room, so the image goes back to the left. And as you can imagine, we're going to continue to size down until the image is back on top. So there's a few different things that are at play here. Essentially what I have is in this thing, we've got a grid on the outside, and then the individual items are made up of Flexbox items. So let's take a look at the grid. Now the grid stuff here is actually really, you can actually kind of see it here. We've got display grid, and then we're defining these grid template columns. Now, I have to admit, I literally copied and pasted this pretty much off of one of Jen Simmons' demos because I still don't quite understand all the different options in repeat. But in this case, auto fit, that sounds like what I want. I want things to automatically fit here. But we're gonna define to me the min max, right? So that we're gonna say fit these items, if they're a minimum of 400 pixels, basically our grid cell is going to be a minimum of 400 pixels and maximum one fractional unit. So it's actually going to divide up the containers. If there's more than 400 pixels of availability for each of our items, divide that up in equal parts for each of our items. And that's basically what we have here. So I'm saying, as long as I've got a minimum of 400, so in this case, I can fit 3 across. If I had a fourth item in here, it'd be like, well, you know what? I don't have enough room to put 4 items at 400 pixels across, so it would throw one down onto the bottom below that and stretch things down. So, for example, when I do this and it goes here, it couldn't fit all 3 items on the same row, so it moved one item down onto the next row. But because it's a grid, it's got the same size here, where Flexbox can do these weird things where this container actually spans the whole width, which wouldn't have been what we wanted. So this is fantastic. So that's one of the pieces. So the second big piece is how do we do this sort of image on top, text on the bottom, and we move things around a little bit. And for that, I'm using display flex. So when this box here is my flex item, and then the it's the flex container, and then inside it, the image and the text is my flex items. So in this case, I'm going to say display flex. If there's not enough room on a particular row, wrap the items onto the next line. That's how we get the text underneath the image when there's not enough room. And then in this case, I'm going to say if you don't have enough room, flex grow. When you have the room, grow. So in this case, the image by default has, and I'll scroll down here, a flex basis of 150 pixels. And I'm saying hey image, try to take up 150 pixels of space, but don't shrink below that. But if you've got the space, grow beyond that, and that would do what we want it to do. So if the text is below it, then it will stretch the image to a full 100% of the container. Now, the other kind of magical thing that I'm doing here is if you notice on the image, I've defined a height of 150 pixels. So I'm just saying, like, let's make this consistent in both those places. But the cropping of the image, in this case, I'm using this thing called the object fit. So I'm going to say object fit cover, and it will essentially crop the image for that location. So that obviously you don't have a lot of control over how it's going to crop that image, but it will at least give you a little bit of our direction. So, I will highlight some of the limitations of this. One of the other limitations is we don't have a lot of control over change in spacing. So, for example, I've defined a 10 pixel margin around the image and around the content, and that will remain consistent even when they're side by side. Now, of course, as you can imagine, 10 pixels plus 10 pixels actually creates a 20 pixel margin in between these items, which, if I don't have this border here, would create 20 pixels between these two items as well, and between these two items. So everything kind of magically works out in that way. But if you wanted something where the margin was different when they're side by side versus when they're one over the other, I haven't quite figured out the magic trick to solving that problem. If you know the answer, throw it on Twitter, throw it on YouTube, write a blog post, put that information out there, because I have no clue how to do it. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, we've got our box content, and I'm basically saying you can shrink and grow as much as you want. But I did indicate that the flex basis is 60%. So in other words, how much room should the text have? And once it gets below a certain point, it will be like, you know what, I don't quite have enough room anymore to fit on that row. So I'm going to wrap down to the next line. And, going back up to what the flex wrap, that's how that works. And that's pretty much all there is to it here. So, when we put these two things together, we get this cool thing where, hey, look at that. The image is over the top, text below it, I resize down, image to the left, resize down, image back on the top, going down, and I've got these stacked items. And this works like magic. So I hope you enjoyed that lovely little presentation.